Hello and welcome to Reddit Roast number 35, Mal. It's nice to see you again. Today we've got a bunch of engineers, just randomly a bunch of engineers, which is an interesting demographic. There's lots of engineers applying for business schools, so no surprise there. We'll talk about how their profiles stack up compared to each other. We're at that point in the cycle. We're currently towards the end of November. We're at that point in the cycle where everybody is deciding, should I retake the GRE? Should I retake the GMAT or not? So we'll talk about that and a couple of cases of whether a particular applicant should retake the test. We have a difficult decision, a classic difficult decision of, do I accept my dream school with no scholarship, or do I accept a slightly maybe lower ranked school but with a good scholarship? And we'll talk about how to go about that decision. And it's going to be a fairly quick meeting today because I have got a bunch of client meetings I need to get to, and Mal's got a bunch of editing we need to do. So we're going to get through quite quickly. Mal, should we dive in?
Yes, we should. All right. Profile 1, 27 male French engineer, expat in Greece. Now, this applicant is applying to INSEAD full-time in round 1, March 2026. 27 male French, civil structural engineer with 4+ years of work expat in Greece as a deputy project manager on a large infrastructure project. Has also worked previously in the Middle East. Academics, an engineering degree from France, master level, GMAT of 645, and a TOEFL score of 106. Some leadership and extras there as well. Completed the Athens Marathon, represented my company at diplomatic or institutional events, and is learning Greek. Some recommenders, my international director and a senior contact from the French consulate. Post-MBA goals, move into broader leadership and operations roles, ideally through a corporate leadership program. Some questions, I will get to those. What do you think of this profile overall, Sam?
Interesting one overall. Let's dive in. So academics, right? 645 GMAT is equivalent to about 690 or so in the old test, which is pretty. It's a little bit low for INSEAD, but it's not a disaster. We don't know anything about the undergrad. We just know that there was a master's level as well in there. So, and OP's made it into an engineering company. I hope that their GPA is not a disaster, but without knowing the number, it's hard to know. And it sounds like that was from French engineering degree. So INSEAD being French will absolutely know how that grade stacks up. And so if it's a bad grade, it will be an issue. If it's a good grade, it will be a strength. We don't know. So that's on the academics. French are very underrepresented, typically speaking, in most MBA programs. Now, not quite so much for INSEAD. Obviously, just outside of Paris, it gets more French applicants than other schools, but still, the French are underrepresented generally in MBA world. So URM, I think, is fair to say. Extracurriculars, quite unique. Running the Athens Marathon, obviously because he's expat in Greece, and then raising funds for charity. This is all quite unique stuff. Representing the company at diplomatic events, learning Greek. I would say focus on the parts that are like community focused. Learning Greek is interesting kind of for your own development and you're useful for your career maybe, but it doesn't add that much to the business school environment necessarily. So try and focus when you think about your extracurriculars on the community aspect. For example, did you run the marathon with a group of friends and did you become closer together? Did you support each other? Those are the kinds of stories that are going to be more unique and more interesting on the extracurricular side. Now, professional looks nice. I think there's a few promotions in there as well. I imagine that you don't get to deputy project manager on a large infrastructure project without some degree of promotions. So I suspect there are some promotions in there, which will definitely be helping OP. Schools look for that kind of development, which is nice. International experience, obviously Greece, but I think there was also mention of the Middle East and stuff on certain work. So that will certainly help, particularly for INSEAD, who love international experience and they love you having set multiple languages. By the way, OP, that language factor is huge for you. French, English, Greek, that's INSEAD's dream. So that will really, really help. We don't know the brand of the engineering company, which is a thing. Just like every other sector, consulting, investment banking, there are kind of tiers within engineering. It's a little bit more nuanced because they're not necessarily well known sort of publicly. But if it's a well-known brand within the engineering space, make that clear. That will be a plus for you if that's the case. Goals, this leadership development program that's mentioned here, that's a great idea for a goal. No objections there. I really like that. Question over what the long-term goal would be. Maybe there's some sort of entrepreneurship. We've seen applicants we've worked with civil engineering backgrounds have talked about, for example, the startups that are disrupting the construction industry, maybe setting up an AI technology that can help the construction industry somehow. There's quite a lot of interesting entrepreneurship opportunities there as well that might be good for the long-term goals, just to build on that. So overall, oh, and there's one other thing. I think there was a mention of the letters of recommendation. Where was
Under
that?
the leadership.
Where?
Yeah,
Um,
under that.
oh yeah, recommendations here. So that's really, really nice, right? Having direct managers with direct and direct contacts who've really worked with you, been in the trenches with you. That's really, really nice. So that's a big plus as well on the recommendation side. So overall, a very classic engineering profile. I'm not seeing anything particularly stand out, except maybe the international experience of the languages, which INSEAD will really, really like.
All right. Okay, and OP has some questions.
Mhm.
Given my profile, should I double down on essays or storytelling, or does a test retake truly move the needle? So should OP strengthen their essays and secure their recommenders, or should they focus on the TOEFL and the GMAT retake?
Yeah. So to be blunt, INSEAD would really like that score to be about 20 points higher. 645, equivalent to a 690. They would really like that to be a 665, equivalent to about a 710, if possible. That's around their average. And other engineers will be typically having quite high GMAT scores. Now, OP is French, so English is not mother tongue. So there's a little bit of leeway there on the verbal side, but still, a 20-point improvement on the GMAT would definitely be a big thing here. Now, the way I generally approach this is, given that we are sort of end of November, the question is, do you have time to retake it with your work? I don't know. So that'll be a factor. And the other thing is, how highly are you scoring in your practice tests? Because if you're scoring, 715 in the practice tests and you're only nailing a 645 in the real thing, there's obviously lots of upside there. If this was a fluke and actually you've been scoring even worse, or 605 in your practice tests, that kind of makes me think maybe it's not worth retaking. So those are the two factors affecting whether or not to retake the GMAT. I'm leaning towards yes here, obviously without all the information that I need to know for sure. Now, if the answer is no, and OP decides to double down on the storytelling and the essays, there's a couple of pieces of advice that I have here. The first is that you want to portray yourself, given that your short-term goals are these corporate leadership development programs, right? Great short-term goal. You want to portray yourself as an individual contributor that has been successful at that, right? At the engineering side, that has seen the impact of management and wants to pivot into a more managerial role. That's the narrative that you want to be going for. Now, to do that, I'd love to hear an interesting story of how you have witnessed this yourself. For example, working on an engineering project, on a construction project, where you realized that all of your engineering work was overshadowed by a management decision, right? To see, you really saw the impact that actually management can be exponentially higher than the individual contributors, and you want to move into a position where you can make that impact. That's the sort of story I'd want to be seeing. And the other factor that's key here is, as you tell that story, make sure that you are communicating using emotions. You are not a robot engineer. We see plenty of these. I studied mechanical engineering for my undergrad. I've seen plenty of these people who are engineers and very good engineers, but don't have the emotional intelligence to become leaders. We need you to demonstrate that emotional intelligence in your essays, in your storytelling. So that's going to be super important. Now, one other thing I'd like to mention on INSEAD is, there's this question over like, how do I improve my chances? And Mal, the big one here for INSEAD, which we didn't pick up on, but I want to just emphasize, is the Jan intake for INSEAD, CBS, Columbia have one of these as well. They tend to be less competitive. They do tend to be less competitive. They have higher admit rates. Why? Well, because the lion's share of MBA applicants are used to September deadlines for a September or August start, and they follow that timeline. So for you to be targeting the Jan intake, you're off the usual timeline. So you're not competing with as many people. And so these programs tend to have lower, less applicants and higher admit rates. So that was one of the key things. Now, I think OP is already on that track, but I just want to make this clear.
All right. Okay. I think we've covered all of the feedback for OP. Are we ready to move on, Sam?
Yeah, let's do it. NASA. We have a rocket scientist.
Yes, NASA intern. This is a deferred MBA profile from the US, from the South, 22 female, academics, non-target engineering, 3.53 GPA. Little sad emoji there as well. Work experience. She's got 3 NASA internships and has built and tested hardware, strong recommenders, and also 1 internship at a big space company as well, where she led a lot of her own ops. Extracurriculars, club president, revived the club after COVID, a university STEM student council representative, racing team member, has done some fundraising, and also does fashion design and cosplay for fun. GRE, not yet, taking in Jan. Essays, not sure what I should highlight. Post-MBA goals, entrepreneurship or program management. Target schools, MIT, the MIT LGO, which I think is the Leaders for Global Operations, Harvard, Wharton, Stanford, and Kellogg. I also have a postgrad job offer from the big space company, and OP's not sure if including offer letters on application helps. What do you have to say?
Yeah, great. What a great position to be in. This is awesome. So let's start with the academics, right? 3.53, nah, right? 3.6 or so is the average of these programs. So it's not a train wreck, but it's a sad emoji. I think that's fair. We don't have any GRE or GMATs yet. It's going to be important. It's going to be important. Why? Deferred applicants tend to have higher GMAT scores, GRE scores, than full-time program, than experienced candidates. Why? Because, well, A, you're at university and you're currently in study mode, so you should be generally testing better. 2, OP is mother tongue English, so should be nailing the verbal side of both of these tests. So generally the expectations for OP are going to be relatively high. I'd like to see a GRE over 328 or so. The GMAT above the 700, 695-ish mark would be really nice to see. But to be fair, OP's got a very strong profile outside of academics that really, helps here. So let's talk about that now. Demographic, look, female as an engineer in NASA, in big space company, I am sure is a minority in that work environment, and will be, in a sense, in an engineering, in a MBA sense as well. So of all the engineers who are applying, not that many of them are going to be female, and therefore that adds a sort of diversity perspective to the application. So that's a positive. Extracurriculars, really solid leadership in there, fundraising in there, and an obvious, passion for engineering. I see the racing team in there as well. So great extracurriculars, about as good as they can be for this stage in your career. Professional. This is where OP really stands out. Right. Has internships, really solid internships. That's one of the key things they're looking for in deferred MBA applicants in a very sexy sector, which is space exploration, and very much in the news right now. And, it's definitely something that they will be grabbing onto. They'd love to have people from that industry in the cohort. Great letter of recommendation, right? We have this LORs from internships. A lot of deferred applicants struggle to get those professional recommendations. They're always talking to professors who are tired and bored and underpaid and give crap recommendations. These LORs are going to be very, very strong. So that's awesome. And then the offer letter, we'll just cover this now while we're on the case. You should definitely be including a mention of this offer letter. You don't necessarily need to upload it and put it on the, upload it into the portal. Although if you get the opportunity to do that, it wouldn't be a bad idea. What matters most is that you put this on your resume in the future. At the top of your resume, put it as, the dates, Jan 2026 to ongoing, for example. Expected, you could put in brackets. Put it on your resume, put it in your optional essay, put it in your career goals essay if you need to. Make this abundantly clear, because the difference between a deferred applicant who has an offer and a deferred applicant who doesn't have an offer, particularly has an offer from a great company, those are miles apart, and that's going to be a big distinguisher for you. So OP, definitely include that. I love it. Okay, goals. Maybe a little bit more to kind of think about and talk about here. I like program management as a short-term goal. I'm a little bit wary of entrepreneurship, as our regular viewers will know here by now, that unless you've got a really strong or a fairly kind of solidified entrepreneurship idea, then it's a little bit of a risk. In fact, it's quite a big risk to be taking, to use that as your short-term goal in your MBA applications. Why? Well, because it might not work. You might not get paid for a long time. Either way, you're going to be damaging the school's stats. So it could be a risk. I would prefer to have entrepreneurship as the long-term goal, and something more concrete and short-term and visible in the medium, in the short-term kind of post-MBA goals or in that space. You have an offer from big space company. I would just follow that to its conclusion, right? That's going to be your work for the next 2 or 3 years. After the MBA, then what? Is it going back to that company? Do they have a history of sponsoring MBAs, for example, in which case that would be amazing? Or is there a natural, one of their competitors who's bigger and more developed and more glam that you want to pivot to afterwards? That's the sort of short-term goal I'd really want to see there. Yeah. So that's goals. And so overall, a very, very strong profile. And with the GRE GMAT yet to play for, potentially HBS Stanford quality here.
Okay, and that brings me to my question, actually. What are OP's odds at M7 schools?
If you can get that GMAT into the 700s, or the GRE north of about 330, then very strong. Not just the M7, but the Harvard, Stanford, Whartons of the world. I think if the GRE comes in kind of mid 320s, low 320s, then I still think M7s are on the cards, the MITs, LGOs of the world, Kellogg maybe as well. But yeah, it'll come down to that score.
Okay. And what can OP do to kind of strengthen their application for this?
Yeah, I think just like we said with the engineering profile previously, show that you've got the leadership chops as well as the engineering skills, the potential for leadership. So, for example, club president, right? You're starting to demonstrate what Harvard call a habit of leadership, what MIT love to see as well. The difference, the way that OP is going to be successful is if they can distinguish themselves from the good engineers and position themselves as a future engineering leader. Recommenders can talk about this. You can point towards your extracurriculars. You can point to early leadership experience that you've had, for example, leading a particular operations project, for example, right? Really focusing on the leadership components of the engineering work will be really, really nice. The other thing I'd like to do is to try and include an interpersonal angle wherever possible. Why? Again, it comes back to this stereotype of engineers being quite robotic and emotionally not particularly advanced, right? It's a stereotype. It's not fair. Obviously, there are engineers who have that emotional intelligence. Those are the ones that tend to make the leadership roles. So I would say that to really focus and brainstorm interpersonal, teamwork, leadership stories and tell them from a quite emotive perspective. That's the way to stand out. So, for example, for MIT's video, right? What do you want to tell your classmates? I want to tell the classmates about a time when I supported one of my struggling colleagues at big space company during my internship. Yeah. Right? It's not an engineering challenge. It's a human challenge. That's the sort of thing I'm looking for. Okay.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. So I think that's all of OP's questions and our review. Should we go on to three, Sam?
Let's do it.
Right, profile three. This is 25 male, white, a tech consultant, currently with 3.5 years of work experience, will be 4 at matriculation. Work experience is in the same company since undergrad, is focused on ERP implementations and financial digital transformations at a smaller firm, which is well recognized in the industry, but not really, like for the average person. 2
Mhm.
promotions. Currently, is leading a team of 2 other consultants as well. OP has a good track record of delivering successful implementations and direct relationships with the companies and the clients he's worked with. Some education stats in there. Statistics major, English minor at a top 20 university, GPA 3.56, a GRE of 327, slightly more skewed towards the verbal. Thinking about retaking for 330 plus, was doing better on the quant practice. Additional,
Mm.
I see an extracurricular, consistent volunteering in college and since graduation, working with disabled children and helping them exercise and get active. Post MBA goals, pivot into a role in product management in the fintech industry, switch from tech consulting and work with executives to help reshape their operating systems. Goal schools, CBS, Stern, Tuck. I see a question in there. We'll get to that. What is your overall general take temperature of this profile?
Okay. Academics, right? GPA 3.56, so pretty in line with the 3.6 average of top schools for MBA programs. GRE is pretty average as well, maybe a little bit above on the verbal side, a little bit below on the quant side perhaps, but solid. I would say that now would be just a good time to highlight this, to answer this question, thinking about taking the 330. We talked in a previous roast about whether somebody should take the GRE GMAT again. And one of the questions was, were you scoring higher in previous practice tests? If yes, that's a good sign to take it again. And OP is a great example of this. If OP was scoring better on the quant and practice tests, then probably leaving a bit of value on the table here and should probably take the test again. So that's on the academic side. Pretty in line, nothing special, but in line, I would say at the moment. Demographics, so white male is very common. And I'm sure it's very common within the kind of tech consultant route as well. So pretty ORM. I would say on the plus side that the age, I think OP talks about 4 years of work experience at matriculation, exactly the right age. So that helps. In terms of extracurriculars, now there's this story about, where is it? The volunteering with disabled children.
Additional.
Under additional here. So that is a very strong extracurricular, obviously. Why? Because you're helping others, because you're building community, it's inclusive, and because it's since graduation. Everybody has extracurriculars from college, right? It's kind of part of the course. But since graduation, that's unique. That's what they'll love to see. That encourages them that you will be really active in your community during the MBA. So that's very strong extracurriculars. We like that. Even better, if we can connect that to your goals, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but if we can connect that to your goals, that would be the dream. Professional, all right, not a particularly sexy sector doing ERP implementations as a tech consultant, fair, but there are promotions in there, right? A couple of promotions, that's definitely a big plus. 2 is more than, I'd say 1 is about average for an MBA, 2 is better than average, so that's really, really nice. And then you mentioned having these strong relationships with executives. Maybe you can use that as an opportunity to get a good letter of recommendation as well. So it looks like from an LOR standpoint, OP's in a good position as well. So OP, good professional experience, solid, nothing particularly outstanding again, but solid. Now, as goals, hoping to pivot into financial technology as a PM. It's solid. It does make sense. I'd like to take that a step further. I'd love if OP can link these goals to the extracurriculars that he's involved in. I'm not sure how easy this will be, but this is sort of conversation we would explore with clients. But for example, you've been working with disabled children and you want to work in financial technology, in product management, in fintech. Is there a world where could you maybe write a narrative that's like, I want to, perhaps for your long-term goals, for example, I want to set up a fintech product or an app that helps disabled people to manage their funding. Maybe you've identified a reason why disabled people struggle to use existing technology, and you can bring some disruptive new technology in there that where you can combine fintech with your extracurriculars. There's something there maybe, and that would be a really, really unique and nice goal that really only you can do because you're the one with those unique experiences. Maybe there's something you saw during your ERP implementations that focused, that you could bring in like an inclusive angle here. That would also link to your inclusive work within your extracurriculars. Something there. So I like the goals, but I think you could take it a step further. I think there's more that could be done. Overall, then, solid. I'm not seeing anything particularly stand out, except for maybe those extracurriculars.
Okay, and OP's target schools are mentioned as the CBS Stern Tuck tier. So OP says that I'm completely unsure if these target schools are too far reaches for me, as I worry about not having a name brand employer. Which schools would be a good match?
Yeah, that's fair. The name brand employer thing, let's just touch on that. If it's a well-known firm in your industry, but not the average person, make that clear on your resume. For example, some clients of ours add a line underneath the company, the title of the name of the company. They add a line saying, second biggest engineering consultancy in Scandinavia, for example, right? Add that company description to your resume that helps a layman understand that where you are at is at the pinnacle of your industry, even if they've not heard of it. So that's one thing. The other thing is, so let's talk about the actual schools. So for me, OP is at their reach is probably bottom of the M7. That's where I see them reaching. So that's the Columbias, the MITs, the Kellogg's and Booths of the world. But that is reachy, given the lack of brands, maybe, given the sort of middle of the park GPA and academics. I think the mid is T10. So the kind of the Yales, the NYU Sterns of the world. And then I would say T15 is probably safe for OP. And if OP was targeting scholarships, that's where they would typically come from. I think OP could probably secure a sensible, let's say 40, 50K scholarship from a T15 safer school. And then it comes down to, OP's risk appetite and how much they want a scholarship to make that decision. But that's where I see OP roughly positioned.
Okay. And I know we discussed the narrative earlier, but just keeping those goals in mind, like OP's short-term goal is product management in fintech. What would be, keeping that narrative in mind as well, what would be a good long-term goal for OP?
Yeah, I think this idea of building solutions for people with disabilities is the dream long-term goal. Probably as an entrepreneur, really, unless this company's already doing that. I'm not aware of any off the top of my head. I'm sure there are some out there, but identifying a particular niche and building it and having OP tell a story of building their own entrepreneurship venture to target this niche. For me, that's the dream long-term goal. I think that would be really, really nice.
Okay. All right. I think we've covered everything for this profile. Are we ready for profile 4?
Let's do it.
All right. Our last profile for the day is a round 2 applicant. MBB weak ECs, we'll see that. Applying to a few M7 schools, Stern plus Haas in round 2. GPA 3.6 from a T5 public university. GRE 326. 167 quant, 159 verbal. Might take it one more time to bring up that verbal score. Work experience 3 years at MBB in the US. Will be finishing the 4th year at matriculation. Currently on track to become manager in spring, but that's after round 2 decisions come out. Extracurriculars are strong from college, but post-college is a bit weaker. Working on self-published cookbook and is teaching cooking to teenagers sometimes. There's also some pro bono consulting volunteering through their firm. Career goal, leadership for a large payments company or start own payments venture for B2B customers. Most of their MBB experience is in this space. Mostly worried about ECs. We'll discuss that later, but generally, what is your take on this profile?
Yeah, good. Let's dive in. I think academically 3.6 from a T5, yeah, solid. Not outstanding, but very solid. No questions over that. GRE 326. Again, another candidate thinking, should I take it again? Targeting verbal in particular, it does sound like OP is possibly mother tongue English. I'm assuming, I think so, American, right? Mother tongue English probably has quite a lot of room to get that verbal score up. So again, I'm leaning towards yes, probably take that again. But look, solid academics, reasonable academics. In terms of demographics,
Don't think it's mentioned in the profile.
okay. So we'll skip that. Not doesn't look like demographics is going to be a factor. In terms of extracurriculars, yeah, we'll talk about this more, but as I kind of point I make quite often, extracurriculars after college are worth more than during college. Now there might be a workaround here because I think OP talks about besides the cookbook stuff. There's a few other things that we might be able to use for leadership stories, but I do think extracurriculars is going to be the weakness. We'll talk about how to strengthen that. Professional, right? MBB, obviously very strong, right? Every year we work with a handful, a dozen and a half a dozen or so MBB candidates. Some of the key factors are: one, promotions. Currently on track for promotion to manager, or manager equivalent, it looks like OP has maybe already had a promotion or two. So I'm thinking from a promotional perspective, that will be, the OP's got a strength there. It's a plus. Direct management experience, it looks like that is either there or will be there about soon. And that is another plus for OP. Because there are two real things that they're looking for that distinguish MBB candidates. Now, every year we put MBB people into Harvard, and we have a few that don't make it into Harvard, and they get into typically other M7s. And here's the differentiator. The ones that get into Harvard and the top schools is they have leadership responsibilities within their MBB work. Typically, they are cohort ambassador or something of that kind of title, where they are representing their cohort of consultants to the MBB leadership and the partners. That's one. The other is they have advanced or more advanced than expected management experience. In other words, they've managed work streams, they've managed juniors within the consulting space, which is a very, very intense leadership training, which schools love because you bring that into the cohort and they like that contribution. So those are the ways that MBBs typically stand out, that MBB applicants typically stand out. At the moment, I'm seeing one of two. So and that's the management side. So solid, but not outstanding on the on the professionals. Goals: leadership for a large payments company or start my own payments venture. Yeah, these make sense. I would encourage OP that leadership for a large payments company, that would typically be your short-term goal, and you'll start your own payments venture for B2B customers. That would typically be the long-term goal for the reasons we've discussed. And entrepreneurship as a short-term goal is a bit of a gamble, a bit of a risk for the school. Yeah. So that way around is better. Good. So conclusion, relatively mediocre-ish stats for an M7, relatively mediocre stats for an MBB applicant. A lot of consultants going to have much higher GRE scores than that, but solid work experience. So overall, yeah, strong profile.
Okay, and OP is a last-minute applicant who can only apply in round 2. I see from the comments that OP has some concerns about, my worry is once I get my manager promotion next year, my work will only pay for my MBA if I leave within 6 months of the promotion. After that point, the cost of the MBA and the value it would add to my career do not make sense for me to apply. So they can only apply in round 2. What
Okay.
are their chances?
Okay. So I just want to, as an aside here, I do want to highlight that if you can get sponsored as an MBB candidate, you can get sponsored for your MBA. That is beneficial to your application. Why?
Mhm.
Because you have a guaranteed return offer into a well-paying job. And especially in today's job market, the schools really want to, they love to see that. So that's just an aside. So the question about last minute candidacy, look, you're not really last minute. It's mid-November and you've already taken the GRE. So I wouldn't really call this last minute. We're still signing new clients at the moment. It's a little bit later than we'd like, but it's happening. So I wouldn't really call this a last minute application. If you hustle, you'll be fine. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and do you think OP should retake that GRE?
Depends. I mean, it looks like there is upside on the verbal, especially. OP is talking about taking it to bring up the verbal, and they seem to be mother tongue English. So yes, I think there is quite a lot of upside. It is certainly a mediocre GRE score at the moment. So yes, I would advise yes.
Mhm. All right. And I think the other big question that OP has is I'm mostly worried about ECs, as I didn't
Mm.
really make the most of my post-college experience, partly due to long MBB hours, another part due to not really planning for an MBA. The cookbook will likely not be published, and the cooking classes were mostly with friends and family. So how do you think OP can frame their ECs given all of these?
Yeah. Okay. Couple of things. So is there did I see a mention of pro bono consulting somewhere as well? That was
You did,
that
yeah, that
here,
was,
6 months of pro bono consulting. Okay. So a couple of points. First one, this pro bono consulting, volunteering through your firm. That's probably where you're going to get your leadership stories from. Why? Well, pro bono consulting, you tend to have slightly more senior level responsibilities than in the real world in your McKinsey or MBB work. You tend to have a little bit more management responsibility, a bit more decision making power, etc. So I would say the leadership stories probably come from that. Now, if there's a weakness to the pro bono consulting, it's that it's not really community building. And that's what schools love to see in the extracurriculars. So, what the other option you've got is to take these this cookbook and cooking classes and try and formalize them and pitch them as community building. What do I mean by that? If you can position yourself as a cook that teaches group cooking classes that brings people together from the community, that you can formalize this and make this really look like a thing. For example, starting an Instagram page, even a website, right? Make this sound like a thing. Add it to your resume as a leadership experience bullet point with a name and a start date and a title. You can make this look like a real thing on your resume. Now, I don't know how much there is, how many classes OP is taught. So it's hard to know whether this is reasonable. But if it's more than, 4 or 5 kind of classes, the same group, you're well within your rights to start an Instagram page and turn this into a thing. And that would make it into actually quite a unique and quite interesting leadership experience, community building experience that would definitely inspire a kind of leadership story. For example, HBS SAB, tell us a leadership story. That would definitely be something you could lean on. So I don't think OP is in such a bad position on the ECs. It depends on how they frame it.
Yeah, yeah. And they do have some strong college ECs. I see multiple leadership positions.
There
So
you
yeah.
go. There you go. So if you can position, you had a leadership role in college and you had a leadership role setting up these cooking classes, then you are starting to look like you have the habit of leadership that the HBSs of the world are looking for.
Okay. All right. I think that's all for OP. I hope we've answered your questions. Should we quickly do our bonus question?
Yeah, real quick.
Real quick. Darden, no money versus Cornell Johnson, lots of money. Looking to pivot to IB. Got into Darden with no scholarship and Cornell with a bit more than half. There's these two options, assuming Darden doesn't budge with any negotiation. Have a background in PMM with healthcare health tech, currently working as an independent marketing growth strategy consultant for healthcare startups, looking to pivot to IB short term or corporate development long term. Have heard about both schools being great for IB, but want some more opinions. Ideally, want to settle in the Southeast long term, but open to working in NYC short term.
Yeah, okay. I would choose Cornell. Johnson with a scholarship that covers just about half. So how much are we talking for half? 2-year MBA program, fees in the region of somewhere between 80 and 100K in all dollars. So you're getting an 80 to 100K-ish scholarship, kind of in that ballpark. That for me is the swinger. Other factors, Cornell's Ivy League brand is really, really nice. It has better investment banking links that I know of. For example, it has established systems that help you meet alum who are working in IB in New York City. It's about a 4-hour bus ride to New York. So it's not ideal, but it's doable. And the scholarship is worth a lot, especially nowadays, graduating with 200K of debt versus 100K of debt. Or maybe OP can pay the remaining 100 with their own savings and graduate with no debt. Bit of a sign-on bonus to rebuild their savings buffer. Yeah, I think that's a really strong, compelling case. I'd be choosing Cornell. Now, the only caveat to this is Darden's really unique selling point is it focuses on the case method. Some people love the case method. OP is not pivoting into consulting, who are normally the case method types. OP wants to go into investment banking. Investment banking isn't a particular stickler for case method, so I don't think that really swings it for them. But that is one caveat that might kind of change it certainly for other people. If OP was aiming to get into consulting, I would say the Darden case method would probably send it that way, but that's not the case. So for me, it's Cornell with a scholarship. Bite their hand off, grab it, enjoy it, go and have a good time.
I see someone making the case for Darden really hard in the comments down below. And they say they would definitely ask Darden to match. Do you think that would be a...
Yeah. Look, I don't know what the negotiation stance is. Okay. So OP is assuming Darden doesn't budge. I'd be very surprised if they don't budge at all. They might not match it, but you've got to ask. You've got to try. If they come back with 50K, a little bit less, but still solid, then at least it improves your position and you've got a slightly more difficult decision to make. I would say, though, to be honest, unless they beat it, I'd probably choose Cornell.
All right. Okay, OP, I think you've got your answer there.
Put the vote
That's
in.
all for our profiles today, Sam.
There we go. Voted. Great stuff. Thank you very much for gathering the profiles today, scouring through Reddit to help find these awesome profiles to roast. If you're watching and you enjoyed today's session, or you just want to have your profile roasted, then send us a DM with the link, flag it to us, and we will do our best to include it in next week's roast. If you enjoyed today and you just want to follow more and like and subscribe the channel, we do these roasts every week in, week out. We're at 35 or so now, so we plan to keep going. So like and subscribe, and you can watch us pick apart some more aspiring MBA candidates. Mal, see you next week.
See you next week.
See ya.